Good morning.
Good morning.
Feel free to shift around in your seats. Though there's plenty of extra space in the hall, you could snag another seat if you feel inspired. Happy Father's Day to everyone. Please reach out and contact your father as you can, whether that be a thought or a prayer or some kind of recognition. Really, that's just acknowledging that they're present here no matter what. Our parents, all the significant beings in our life. So it's important, whether that relationship is beautiful or challenging, to reach out and make that connection directly. And also, happy yard sale Sunday. People see this pile of boxes out here? It's pretty impressive. Who here, have people gone shopping yet? It's kind of like a Buddhist carnival here at Buddha Eye right now, right? Usually the holding up simplicity and non-material values, but 1 day out or 2 days out of the year, right, we turn and we say, go shopping, whatever you need, whatever you want. So I was thinking about what to talk about today, and the word that kept bubbling up for me is love, which actually is not so common of a word in my vocabulary. So I was surprised by that. And I think it has to do with the fact that I'm leaving this community in my kind of relatively permanent abiding of this nest. And I've been here for just under a dozen years, more or less, sometimes leaving now and again to train in Japan or working at a summer camp, or one year away before I became a postulant, so pre-ordination. But otherwise, really, I've been here. And so this word love, what is that? We all have a sense, but it's also quite mysterious. So just off the cuff, I would say it's concerned with two main constellations of ideas, energies. And one is caring. It's concerned with well-being, of flourishing, of wholeness, connection. Say the other side is it's concerned with truth, authenticity, something that's real and can be depended upon. And perhaps these two aspects are just taking care of each other. That love is caring for what is true. And maybe the flip side, what's true has something fundamentally to do with caring. That these two aspects are needed. And that lines up nicely with this teaching of the idea of wings of a bodhisattva. So bodhisattva, being of awakening, is the literal translation there. That one wing is compassion, and the other is wisdom. And that these need each other for awakening to unfold. And so I think it's this kind of love that's kept me here, rooted and engaged over the past dozen years. And I think we'll save maybe the sappy part of that for me till a couple weeks from now. We'll have a short goodbye ceremony and a temple anniversary celebration on the 3rd of July, so mark your calendars, please come. And this love also, I think, takes place by ourselves, or what looks like close to being alone in the practice of zazen or meditation. That this aspect of love, this caring and truth, this wisdom and compassion is also present. So I thought today I'd share how I imagine the upright sitting of our school to be engaged in love, partaking of compassion and truth. And so I want to talk about 3 distinct thresholds of this practice of meditation. And of course, it's always suspicious when we start breaking things apart like this. Our school is fond of talking about non-dual, that the body, the mind, and the breath are not different. They're not separate from each other. And yet, when we teach meditation here, we talk about them as being separate. The posture of the body, posture of the breath, and the posture of the mind. So in this way, I'd like to share 3 aspects or thresholds we can find in our meditation practice, which of course, they're totally mixed up in each other but it's useful, I think, to think about them separately. And also, I think it's good to realize that we'll experience them oftentimes chronologically in the way I will share them, and yet oftentimes not, that they'll be happening simultaneously. But in our experience, one aspect or another may emerge as the one that's appearing most strongly. So this first aspect is contingent upon a simple truth that I think we mostly know cognitively, but forget again and again, is that our thinking mind forgets, disregards, ignores, or fails to perceive the physical body. So I'm still surprised that when I'm going about my day, I will start to have a little bit of anxiety about some social interaction I'm having, or tasks I'm needing to get done, and I start to wonder what's going on. And then I realize I just have to pee. That's it. It's not more complicated. Am I alone there? Just if you're willing to raise your hand, okay, no one else, it's just me. Or we have this term hangry, right? So you're hungry, and that just spills over into this utter frustration with everything that's happening around you. And really, it takes sometimes just a wee bit of reflection to say, oh, that is living in my body. That doesn't have to spill over into my mind and how I perceive the world. So the way our thinking mind perceives the world and makes decisions is totally inseparable from our feeling and experiencing in the body. And this split is reflected in our language so easily and naturally that, right, I have a body, or my body. Do you think that the body ever thinks about its mind? I think it's like, oh, I forgot, I just have to pee, like, come on, like, pull it together, right? So it's clearly a one-sided, that kind of cognition is one-sided against the body. And so the aim and centrality of reconnecting the split that we create or experience, hard to say what it is, between the mind and the body and the breath, is really obvious and central in all meditative traditions. So just take a few breaths. It's just very basic, wise counsel that we may receive. When I was a kid, I haven't thought about this for a long time, but I used to have very intense reaction to things. And I would start to hyperventilate, and likely I'd just be weeping and crying. I think I lost my Barney doll once. It's embarrassing to admit now, and I just totally lost it. Something like broke in my psyche. I still remember it. And I thought my brother had taken it, right? So to add insult to injury. And my mom, sort of gruffly grabbed this paper bag, medium-sized paper bag, and pressed it up against my mouth. And of course I'm like, what are you doing? And she's like, just breathe. And then I could see the breath. And that in itself, it does something, right? Mm-hmm. We see the connection in a way that we can't before. And so our meditation practice sets this as one of the primary things we attend to. So it makes sense. The stability of our being requires a connectivity here, a connection. And we can also say that the inverse is true, that when that connection isn't present, it constellates a dis-ease in us. So in terms of using the words, the phraseology of loving, I would say that we can call this aspect loving our whole being. That the mind surrenders some of its energy, and I have here written that the mind thinks in physical sensation for a while. It chooses to rest its constant creating of concepts, its imaging of past and future, and just says, what of this physical body? So important. And it's hard to really overemphasize this aspect of practice. And it can feel intense that we throw away our imaging self for a kind of raw physicality. And a deep kind of rest can appear here, and also a new kind of energy. And so, while it's vital to practice, I also sometimes feel worried that many people in our tradition feel this to be the entirety of zazen practice. Can you feel, even though it's a necessary step of meditation, that there's a subtle distrust of our minds, a subtle distrust of our emotionality that's here in this posture? And I don't know about you, but I want a practice that says my mind is valuable, that my emotions and thoughts have significance and importance, and not that it's just my duty to subdue the mind or calm it down at every instance of practice. We start to think, if we take this up as the only part of practice, that thinking is delusion, or that unpleasant emotions are merely also deluded thinking, rather than being really important aspects of the path. And so, from here we can see taming the mind is only one aspect of practice, and necessary. So from here, when we feel that kind of ease in the body, and we sense that the mind has slowed somewhat, and that we're feeling the full, alive, tactile touch of the body, a new gate and a threshold appears. And so if the first step was the mind thinking the body, I like to think of this second aspect as the body pumping blood into the mind. And that just sounds cool, doesn't it? The body pumping blood into the mind. And so what's going on here? What am I pointing at? So this revolves around central Buddhist teaching, fundamental teaching of no self, which we can misunderstand so easily, and I would say in our day-to-day living, we do misunderstand it. Many moments. We think that it means that just there's no being here, and any being that's appearing, it just must have the wrong idea. That fundamentally nothing's going on. My emotion, if I was awake, I would be simply cool, calm, and collected all of the time, no matter what the situation is. That our self can somehow transform into a zero, and that is a good thing. So we can talk about this as a slight nihilism, a deadening of the mind. But rather, this teaching of no self, it's pointing to the fact that we are an endless, novel, emerging, growing, changing being, through and with alignment to the endless, impermanent, changing world. That there's constant activity, there's endless selfing and creative changes in our being. And so the fundamental problem, the fundamental delusion in a Buddhist sense, is that we hunker down in entrenched views and fixed ideas and perspectives, rather than realizing each moment births this kind of fresh creativity. And when we take that up, the letting go automatically comes with it. In the pumping of the blood, it's a birth, death, birth, death, birth, death. That's an active evolution of our perspective. And so, just as it's so necessary that we engage with the fullness of our physical body as immeasurable pleasant and unpleasant sensations, we must also engage with the fullness of our thinking minds as whatever appears. That in this place of transformation, we need all the phenomena of our being, and not just to smother the thinking mind in somatic sensation. The mythologist Joseph Campbell, I came upon a really beautiful quote of his. He says that a true hero is one who endures self-achieved submission. True hero is one who endures self-achieved submission. So for him, this meant the factual and true and living gods of existence, Well, I'm not sure if it meant that for him, but I think it did. Or the needs of a hero to surrender and to encounter deeply the challenges that'll benefit the world if the hero faces them squarely. And maybe for Buddhists, we can imagine this enduring self-achieved submission to be in relationship with no self, that endless flow and parade of being that's right here all the time. And of course, impermanence. So here we can start to imagine sitting as, let's say, embodying a spacious cavern of being. We actively presence whatever and whomever appears as this moment-to-moment changing self. Sometimes it's like we're a god, living in a heavenly bounty. I think sometimes Eugene can feel like this. You're picking berries off the side of the road, and the sun's there, and you're by the river. A beautiful constellation of phenomena: ease, joy, peace, bounty. And other times, it's like we're a ghost. We're a wraith in the barren wastes, looking for anything to fill us and to fill our thirst and hunger. So I'm going to read some words by Ejo Zenji. So this was the heir and student of Dogen Zenji. Plunging body and mind into the great treasury of light without looking back, sit grandly under the eaves, without seeking enlightenment, without trying to get rid of delusion, without aversion to arising thoughts, and yet without fondly continuing thoughts. Like an empty space, like a mass of fire, letting your breathing flow naturally in and out, sit decisively without getting involved in anything at all. Even if 84,000 random thoughts arise and disappear, as long as the individual does not get involved in them but lets go of them, then each thought will become the light of spiritual power and wisdom. And it is not only while sitting. Every step is the walk of light. So here, when we entertain all the flow of our being, there is grasping and rejecting. There is like and dislike. There is beauty and disgust. And that's important. I think it's something we forget so often, that when we feel it, we just say, okay, that's the bad thing. Let go of that one. This is the good one. This feels good and this feels rounded. It feels like I'm in the center. But I think the treasury of light is pointing us to something else, that in fact we have to endure the endless flow of discomfort, these things which we can't control or keep in a place we like. So the transformation of our practice isn't an abstracting or a sort of nice walk of pleasant bliss, but rather I'd say it's like being carved out by innumerable perspectives. And in fact, within one perspective, there are many perspectives. So I've been noticing it's so dirty right there next to that cushion. And a part of me is like, come on, team, we should have cleaned that up. And then immediately other voices are like, do you know how wild it is at the temple right now with the yard sale? Isn't everyone doing their very best? And actually, in the very soles of my feet, my feet don't care if it's dirty. There's zero care whatsoever. But I think we can subtly sometimes take the frustration of our minds and say, shut up. And sometimes that's appropriate, but actually it just leads, in my experience, to that voice speaking louder and louder, needing to be seen. And so in this kind of holding an empty space, like a massive fire, you just allow all of the voices to presence themselves at once. So subtle difference here. And so this is where our sitting practice, say, goes beyond merely calming down my crazy mind. We become liberated by a full self, which is itself, innumerable selves, revealed moment by moment as a fresh self. So I had a little bit of fun with the words there. I'll say it again. Liberated by a full self, which is itself, innumerable selves, revealed moment by moment as a fresh self. And this feels like a kind of endurance to me most of the time. We don't get to find the self that's right and kick out all the other ones, but instead feel the full presence of the assembly of our being, internal and external. So because the mind is full of the body, has been doing this presencing of the physical body, we can have the weight to simply endure our attractions and aversions rather than being pulled by them, rather than needing to act them out in the world. And of course here, just talking about meditation practice. Oftentimes when we're off the cushion, we don't have that luxury. But a real jewel of this sitting practice is we can simply endure all the multiplicity of my being. And also because the body embraces the mind, our karma, our accumulated, harmful and simplified views of life, they can express themselves directly, all of them showing up. And when this happens, they lose their pull on us. They lose their grip, driving us from behind. Instead, they take the center stage. So I know this is a bit heady, and I reckon I've probably lost a couple people. But I want to give some simple advice pointing to how we can do this kind of practice. And the first one is don't discard calming the mind through being attentive to the body. That likely many years, I remember for me, that was the central practice for years and years and years, as a constant feeling that my mind is just on fire, and any time I really try and use it, it tends to cultivate greater problems in my life. And so simply taking time to be a body was so necessary and important. And in fact, many sits today, that's just all I end up doing. So please cherish that. And in moving to pumping the body or pumping the mind full of blood, I would say, be willing to let it get weird. To experience your full eccentricity, that word eccentric, out of center, eccentric. So just the other night, I was sitting and these words popped into my mind, and it sounded like I was speaking them, but it also didn't feel like me at the same time. And the words said, I definitely did not just place a sorcerer's goblet in your belly. And without missing a beat, I responded, of course you didn't. And so this can feel heavy when we're talking about enduring and submitting. But actually, there's whole hosts of imaginative, playful beings flowing through us that are concerned with all these minute aspects of our life that most of the time our rational, cognitive mind can't deal with. It doesn't want to know about the sorcerer's goblet in its belly. And it won't admit any talk of such things, right? That's just silly. But I think if you enter this kind of practice and allow the mind to flourish in all its color, you'll dream with your eyes open. And we tend to call those visions, I guess, right? We tend to only dream at night when the rational mind shuts down and the mind, the deep imaging mind, becomes central and significant and displays its cares and needs. And so we can experience these dreams actively. And you'll meet goblins and dragons and serpents, right? They're present in every culture in the world, all these folk tales and myths. I don't think they're just made up. I think they have a reality that may not be this corporeal reality, but in our imaginal realms, they play important roles. So the next thing I'd advise is to become friendly and recognize that lack will be a significant part of this practice, the experience of lack. So in the Genjo koan, Dogen Zenji tells us, when the Dharma has not yet fully penetrated into body and mind, one thinks that one is already filled with the Dharma. When the Dharma fills the body and mind, one thinks that something is lacking. When the Dharma fills the body and mind, one thinks that something is lacking. That's not the good news you wanted to hear, right? But in fact, isn't that actually great news for most of our experience? That feeling of lack is really central? And most often, we just try and fix it. We try and constellate the good feelings in our being and try and fill up this sense of lack. But actually, we could think of the reverse, that when we become this great cavern and we presence the active, innumerable, ungraspable being showing up right now, the part of us that wants to be a solid, cohesive being that can control and know, view the world as a kind of objective fact, it's humbled actively, moment by moment by moment, by baby crying, by someone talking too loudly outside the hall, by the rumbling of your tummy. The world's alive, and it can't know it beforehand. So this lack, to learn to cherish it and take care of it is so important, I think, and often, I think, under-discussed in terms of talking about the path and how meditation is involved in that. And lastly, with this kind of practice, which may not be good for every being in this life and every constitution of mental health within a being, it's really important to have a teacher, to work with a teacher, because when you let it get weird, it gets weird. It is weird, right? And that can release powerful things within our being. And also, I'd recommend relying on forms. So if you want to experience this kind of endurance, that if you're merely making decisions on, well, how will I sit today? It'll be like this, it'll be like that. Most often we won't be able to endure. We'll find a way out. The situation is too moving, it's too movie, it's too fragile. And so that's why when you come and practice at the temple, it can feel so cold and stale, right? Same thing every day, no spontaneity. We bow now, we sit down, we look at the wall, right? It's very calculated on purpose. It's cold, it's ancient, and it allows you to meet the fire of your mind. It is what can hold the fire that otherwise we are unable to hold. We turn away from it moment by moment at every opportunity. So with these two aspects, the mind yielding to the body and the body returning energy to the mind, Dogen Zenji, again in the Genjo koan, he points out for us something I'm trying to illuminate. He says, to be verified by all things is to let the body and mind of the self and the body and mind of others drop off. This really curious language. To be verified by all things is to let the body and mind of the self and the body and mind of others drop off. So this is the realm where we start to speak about samadhi, concentration, where we no longer experience the world as a subject with objects and others. Rather, somehow, these things mysteriously come together. There's a mysterious, active self-sameness to everything we experience and our own being itself. We're not cut in half in this way. And further, say this is where caring for beings and a wisdom that knows oneself as all beings come together. It's the culmination of the Bodhisattva path, but also it's simultaneously the cause for path to begin with. Can you feel that? The emergence of that self is not something created or taken from somewhere else. Rather, when we just stop the fantasies of an external world and an internal world, that self-sameness appears as the root of all phenomena to begin with. And so, in terms of love, I would call this to receive and display the love of each being itself. It's complete in its goodness. It's complete in its badness. It's complete in its incompleteness. And this kind of faith in our psychological world. Can you imagine that? Living with that kind of trust of each thing that appears? So in a sense, I encourage you now just to feel into hearing. Hear some sounds for a bit. The yard sale outside. Kiddos in the yard. So although I can't see these beings or know exactly what they're up to, I trust that they're real and that they have a life of their own. And we can come to a place where we trust our minds in the same way. No matter how wretched that being is emerging within us, no matter how beautiful, it's still connected to everything else. So this comes back to Dogen Zenji's teaching of Jiju Zanmai, the concentration of self, receiving and employing self. Funny words there. Self, receiving and employing self. So this lush path of zazen practice is full of surprising steps. Embracing this useless body, embodying the crazy mind, and in relinquishing the center, each eccentric being giving birth to a perfect circle itself. 84,000 random thoughts, just the flow of light. And of course, it reminds us of Bodhidharma's famous utterance, to sit and to face the wall unwaveringly, is to realize that the wise person and the fool are not different. And also in the hymn to the perfection of wisdom, that Prajnaparamita herself is like an ever-flowing fountain of incomparable light. And so, those words about samadhi, they can sound distant and far, but also this lives when we simply accept our function. Who needs help right in front of me? And can I respond? So we move in this way simply all the time. It's possible. And so in closing, I'd just like to say, please don't silence the lion in your chest, but love hard. Love hard and skillfully plunge into that delusion. Let its foolish roar guide you to embody every nook and cranny of your true home. Because she is indeed an ever-flowing fountain of incomparable light. So we have time for maybe just a few questions. And maybe we'll lean towards people who have questions. I know there's some complex material that I may have done a supremely mediocre job of explaining or giving image to. So if there's anything you want to hear more about or just feel utterly confused about, please, now's a good time. You're probably not alone. Mm-hmm.
Does this practice of meeting and allowing the space for all of the flowing of the self in zazen, does that essentially allow for more awareness and more choice of the self that emerges off the mat?
Definitely. Absolutely. And in that sense, I didn't have time to talk about it here, but we're always talking about skillful means, right? And skillful means sort of points us to the idea of off the cushion, although skillful means is also happening internally. But I think as we get burned out and humbled to all the beauty in ourselves and also the schlockiness and the wretchedness and the pettiness, that on the one hand it just builds more compassion for us, and we have less aversion and more understanding when meeting anyone. And so we can say, oh yeah, of course I want that last cookie. I don't have to beat myself up. And so when someone goes ahead and grabs it, you don't have to be like, you jerk. Like you're like, oh yeah, of course. There it is. Enough said. So there's this, I think I don't know, I like that image of being burned out by all of the endless selfing that gives us a new kind of possibility to meet the world, and from a less moralistic and judgmental place.
Genjo, I just wanted to thank you for this talk. I think it's really easy to get into the just the routine of trying to quiet ourselves so much, and it's incredibly important in learning self-compassion and grace, to allow all of these things to be present without judgment. And I just think it's a really beautiful, important teaching that we don't hear about very often when we think of zazen. So thank you.
Thank you for using that word grace.
Yeah.
I really appreciate it.
So you're talking about having all of the different thoughts present during meditation. Now I was wondering if you have advice for if certain thoughts come up that sort of cause pain in the mind, should those ones just be treated as equal to the other thoughts, or is there something you should do specifically with that kind of thought?
Yeah, a great question. Oftentimes, it feels like my most skillful approach when that happens for me is I allow it to be at the center, because I smell it a little bit, and oftentimes there's simultaneously like a ouch, push away. They sort of constellate together, but actually for many people it's also a ouch, let me grab onto that. And we have to learn to discern the difference. And when we have the ouch, grab onto it and ruminate, then we have to emphasize a cooling aspect. And so allowing it to be present, but perhaps giving more energy to the body and the sensations of the body to help release our fixation there. But also, there can't be a hard and fast rule, because when there's the ouch, push away, oftentimes I think it's asking for soft hands to say, where are you going? What do you need right now? And we can say, hey, here, kiddo, right in the center. And for many people, I encourage in this practice leaning a little more into thinking than you're used to in meditation practice. Again, because we have so much teaching about letting go. Almost no one will give meditation practice without saying, yeah, you just let go of the thoughts. But actually what I'm proposing here is a little more, you sort of grab on to its appearance, and its very appearance and changeability will show you that it can't actually be held on to. And then the letting go emerges by itself. So, of course, this is one of the reasons why we don't talk about this very much, is actually because doing it is so much more potent and important. But again, some discussion is good, so I hope that answer is helpful.
This and all our teachings are offered free of charge. If you would like to make a donation, please visit our website at buddhaeye.org and click the donate button at the top of the page. Thanks.